Okay, what we have here is a Dodge one-ton dually with a failed center U-joint. So I thought while I was messing around with it, I could check out my new camera and make a little test video. This is a two-piece drive shaft. There's a flange on the pinion shaft, and the yoke is bolted to that, which is nice. 4 bolts, and you can take the yoke there off the pinion ring and drop that part of the drive shaft. Here's our culprit, the center bearing. Water dripping down. This is from the gap between the bed and the cab. The bearing moves freely one direction and not the other, and it's causing a bad vibration. Just ahead of that is a support bearing, which is pressed on the shaft there and secured with a rubber boot. And forward we see the front U-joint in the back of the transfer case. Both of these U-joints are secured with plastic injection. You can see the hole in the U-joint right there. So what we'll do is we'll match mark that flange and the yoke, and then the yoke and that shaft, and the forward shaft and the rear shaft, because these are balanced as an assembly. We'll also mark where the carrier bearing support bracket is bolted down there, since getting that back on exactly where it is now will eliminate the chance of us ending up with a drive shaft vibration when we're done. So first step will be removing these 4 bolts which specify a 80 foot-pound torque. Once we've got everything match marked anyway, removing those 4 bolts, popping these 2 bolts out and supporting the drive shaft once the carrier bearing is hanging loose, and then finally pulling the forward yoke there out of the transfer case and match marking that yoke with the transfer case output shaft. Alrighty then, 6 15mm nuts later, and this is what we have. The drive shaft sitting on the ground. You can see we got a little bit of ATF out of the transfer case along with the output yoke there. You can see the match marks that I put on it, and that has traced that bracket for the center carrier bearing onto the frame that it mounts to. Back here you can see this U-joint swivels freely in both directions. So does the front one. The center one, however, pivots freely this direction, but as you can see it's seized in the other direction. So what we'll be doing is applying a little bit of heat to soften the plastic up and pushing the bearing cups out either side using a ball joint press. Okay, in this shot you can see I've heated the 2 yokes up with just your garden variety torch there, and here you can see the ball joint press, and I've got that cap pressed about halfway out. Once you get the thing pretty hot, you'll see the plastic starting to erupt out of those holes. Of course, when you're using a torch, wear eye protection, but that plastic stuff comes sneaking right out of there. Okay, I was able to press the U-joint out with my cheap imported press here far enough to where the cap sticks out a little bit, but that's as far as it would go. The ball joint press there isn't really big enough to work on a real Yoda, I guess. Anywho, I put a cup on the underside of the yoke and a socket on the front there, and I'm just going to remove it the rest of the way with the old swinging press. Okay, a couple of light wraps, and here's what you end up with. The cross of the U-joint has run into the other side of the yoke there. So we'll grab the old locking vice grip here and see if we can't twist the cap out of the yoke, which I can't do with one hand. Okay, so there we got the cap off. It's in there pretty tight, so I end up hitting it with some spray lube and knocking it back in and knocking it back out. That loosened it right up and swiveled it out, pulled it off. Next step will be to put the press back on and shove the cross that way so we can do the same thing and pull the other cap. Alright, we just repeated the process here, knocked the other cap out. Once you've done that, you can separate the one yoke from one side of the center cross. In addition to using a vice grip there, I kind of pried against it with a pickle fork a little bit to get some outward thrust and get the cap off easier. Worked pretty well, and that one wasn't nearly as seized. Don't know if it'll show in this video, but there's some pretty good busted up pieces of needle bearing in there. It was, I think, stuck to the cross more than it was stuck to the yoke. Okay, what I've done here is I've gotten the cross all the way out, and after that I just took a normal awl and cleaned out the grooves in here. The first groove is where the snap ring for the new U-joint goes. This other groove was where the plastic locking compound was. That stuff's pretty hard to pick out, but if you drive a pick through the port where the stuff was injected, makes it a lot easier to get that out of there. Probably wouldn't hurt to leave it in, but I just like to clean things up. And then some crocus cloth and a little wire brush to clean things up. I'm kind of a neat freak. Followed by some degreaser, and we'll be ready to assemble the new U-joint. This one cap was really a bugger to remove. I don't know if you can see it clearly, that's what failed. See, some of the rollers are pretty much ground into nothing, and you can see where they've rolled troughs into the outside race on the inside of this cup. That one was really a bugger to get off the cross. Alrighty, we're back in my kind of quasi-clean area on the cardboard here. Torches all put away and everything. Things are cleaned up. Note the match marks here are still lined up. We don't want to have one half of the drive shaft out of phase 180 degrees with the other, because it will be out of balance. New U-joint. Pretty herky joint here. Comes with snap rings and a Zerk fitting. Imagine that greasable. Maybe this one will outlast the factory unit. Anyway, from here we'll just be pulling two caps off, slipping the centerpiece into one of the yokes here, and then tapping the two caps on and getting the snap rings on. Okay, as you can see, we've got the joint assembled here and the snap rings pushed in. Just push those in with a screwdriver until they click in. Make sure they're seated all the way. During the process, of course, we've made sure that everything moves smoothly. It's real easy to get one of those caps kind of cocked when you're trying to push it in. And the other thing you have to watch out for is making sure the needles don't fall out of the grease, holding them into their braces. So the other thing we've got left to do is just thread in and tighten down that needle, and we'll pump in some synthetic grease, and then we'll be ready to install the assembled shaft back into the pickup. Okay, back under the pickup here, I've shoved the end of the drive shaft back into the transfer case. As you can see, I've lined up my match mark on the boot there with what I've left on the yoke. Might point out you want to clean up that shaft to make sure it's spotless when it goes up there. Next, we'll put this bracket back on the hanger, line it up. I won't snug it down until I get the yoke lined up with its match marks and blue Loctite on those bolts. Then I'll grab the torque wrench, 80 foot-pounds 40 foot-pounds and should be all set. Okay, that went in there fine. Now all I've got to do is clean up my mess and take the thing out for drive and see if my vibration is solved or if I've got another problem.